All right, Ben, I'm going to take you back to 2016, that morning when Trump won, and there seemed to be this big amount of surprise that the polls to the public didn't seem to get it right. What went wrong back then?
Trump was behind in most swing state polls. Okay, the pollsters generally gave Hillary Clinton a very likely chance of winning. 538 had her on course, with a 70% chance of winning. Donald Trump had a 30% chance. A 3 in 10 chance, when it comes to probability, when it comes to betting,
Still a
is not
chance.
nothing. Yeah, it's still a serious chance. If you had a 3 in 10 chance of winning the lottery, you would be going all out to buy those tickets, wouldn't you? Okay, and so I think when we look at the forecasts, at least, Trump did have a chance, but it was an unlikely one. What happened in 2016 was the arrival of Donald Trump. He was a new kid on the block. He wasn't your conventional Republican. He did not speak to Republican voters in the same way your conventional Republican like Mitt Romney, like John McCain, like George Bush did. What he did was bring out voters who would otherwise stay at home, new voters, similar to what we saw in the UK with the EU referendum, when the Leave campaign brought out a hell of a lot more white working class voters than polls forecast. Because, look, generally, when a voter is of a certain income, a certain disposition, low attention to politics, it's reasonable to make the assumption they're not going to turn out because they're not engaged with politics. But when you have a campaign like Trump's, like Brexit's, that enthuses these voters in a way pollsters don't expect, well, yeah, the pollsters are going to get it wrong. So just to give you some examples here, Ohio, which was traditionally a swing state. The way Ohio voted was usually the way the US voted, right? In 2016, the polls had Trump ahead by just 2 points, so it was within the margin of error. He ended up winning by 8. I'll give you another one, Pennsylvania. This is the state that matters, by the way, in this race. 2016 had Clinton ahead by 3 points. Trump ended up squeaking by less than 1 percentage points. The pollsters generally, and a lot of the blue wall, the swing states, understated Trump's performance by 3 or 4 percentage points. And the reason that happened was the assumptions about the kind of people that would turn out.
But was
the
pollsters not saying to these people, weren't they not going out to people without a college education saying, oh, are you going to turn out this year? Or were they just assuming that without asking?
If you look at the polls right now and you look at that 1,000 person sample, very logged on. Sometimes, when they're mostly done online, but sometimes they're done by phone. You ask those voters, are you going to vote? 80 to 90% say yes. The turnout historically in America has always been 50 to 60% since the Second World War. Okay, it's always everyone overstates their enthusiasm. The thing polls do really well, and you've got to bear this in mind, is they're good at getting a demographic sample of the country, a representative of the country. If it's 52% women, 48% men, they're going to get that quite well. But they overstate more often than not, in my mind, the level of enthusiasm. What you have in polls, and it's quite a logical one, is too many logged on voters, people who are more aware of the news, more opinionated about the news than the average American, than the average voter. We had that here in Britain, and we could be seeing that again. Now, who that benefits, we don't know, because Trump is more of a household name now. This is the thing. Trump is not enthusing people who, we don't expect to turn out. So what we're seeing in US polling right now is a level of apathy from young voters for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris about issues such as Israel-Palestine that we're not really ever seeing before. Biden won young voters 60-40 at the last election, right? Polls right now have that demographic closer to 50-50. Some polls samples. And the question for me is this: is youth apathy so big that it's going to ruin it for Biden, ruin it for the Democrats? Or do the pollsters have too many logged on voters, too many voters aware of the news, too many voters with an opinion when voters generally don't? We don't know.
You know when you get your sample that some of those people are not necessarily telling the truth. Not that they're lying they know they're lying, but they're saying that they're enthusiastic about something when they're not going to be. And you've got to make assumptions about that. So knowing that the pollsters got that wrong in 2016, how did they still get that wrong in 2020, knowing that they needed to correct for this stuff?
Exactly. And you would have thought they would have. You would have definitely thought they did. Here's the thing. They thought they had overcorrected, or rather corrected enough with the 2018 midterms. So in the US, you have the presidential election in 2016, and then you have the midterm, the House of Representatives, and a great many Senate seats in 2018. And the pollsters then didn't do too bad. They did quite well. Okay, good result for the Democrats, as forecast, as expected. Okay, there wasn't really much out there. And so pollsters thought, we've corrected. But the unfortunate truth is this: Donald Trump. It is Donald Trump. It's a personality candidate. A personality brings out voters who would otherwise not go for insert Republican here. I think it has a lot to do with that when Trump is on the ballot, even though, he is a household name now, even though voters are, I suppose, more used to his inhibitions, he does encourage or discourage a willingness to come out for him, or willingness to declare for him. People will do it in a secret ballot, but they won't necessarily do it in a poll. Just an example here as well. Trump is improving Republican numbers among Latino voters in a way that I suppose is surprising you. It's a certain kind of Latino voters, those based in Florida, those based in Texas, and what it is these types of voters who are so, they refuse to talk to market research firms, who are quite conservative anyway, quite socially conservative, quite, anti-abortion and all the rest of it. And to summarize, they do not like talking to pollsters. So Trump as a bogeyman turns some voters off from declaring outright that they're coming out for him. But he also, again, brings out people who would otherwise not turn out. The pollsters have got to get to grips with the fact their electorate is always moving. Old assumptions are dying when you have new candidates such as Trump.
So knowing that he's unique, knowing that people don't want to say to strangers, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, how do we know that this time around pollsters are anywhere close?
Polling is always a guessing game. Well, it's a science. It's a science. Polling has a margin for error. If I said you were on 52% and your opponent was on 48%, don't be surprised if you lose, because in polling there's always a science, a margin for error, 3 points here or there. So if you got 49%, don't say the polls got it wrong. You were within the margin for error there. Is there reason to think the pollsters might be getting it right this time? To tell you the truth, I have a theory that they might, and I wrote a piece on this myself, like maybe the pollsters are getting it right this time. And it has a lot to do with the fact where Trump is now. Now, in 2016 and 2020, there were a lot more voters who were, on paper at least, undecided, who weren't declaring themselves for a certain candidate. So you always had Clinton on like around 45, 48%, and then Trump on 42 to 45%. Okay, so you can see there's just a portion left over for either smaller candidates or undecided. We're not seeing that now. We're seeing Trump, for the past few months, polling close to 48, 49% in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and elsewhere. He is, or was, because he's gone down a bit in some states, he is or was polling at the result, the end result of 2020 and 2016. For the polls to understate him now will be to assume Trump is getting more than 50% of the vote in these states. It's to assume he's going to do eons better than what he did in previous elections. Now, to assume that is to assume the Democratic base is so apathetic, so unenthused. Possible, but polls show they are being slowly rallied by Harris. And it's also to assume Trump is reaching out to get new voters who otherwise did not come out in 2020. Hard to believe, but it's not impossible. So the reason to think that maybe the pollsters might be getting it right now is that maybe that Trump's poll position is the highest it's ever been in these states. In 2020, he underperformed, or rather, he outperformed the polls because there were more people who were declaring for undecided that eventually went to him. Does that make sense?
So previously there was this gap where we knew people weren't admitting who they were voting for, or they were still undecided. Now that gap is eroded, so we got to assume that people are being more outspoken about voting for Trump. It's been 8 years. They've made their mind up about him by this point, and more people are willing to share that. And that implies, I suppose, that you can't be missing this section of the population. We now know where those people might be sitting. Is that right?
I'll just give you an example. Take Wisconsin, for instance, where Trump really outperformed the polls, and where, by the way, Hillary Clinton did not visit once in 2016. So Trump right now is on 100% of what he got in 2020. So just to put it bluntly, if he got 50% in 2020, he's currently polling 50% now. I know those aren't the figures, but you get the point. He's currently on 100% of that. At this point in 2020, Trump was on 88% of what he eventually got. And in 2016, Trump is on 90% of where he got. There is currently now, he is polling what he got before, which is to say, if the mistake happens again, if the pollsters understate him again, he's going to be blowing this election out of the water. And if you believe that, well, I don't.
With you. So this time around then, if we assume the polls are now no longer understating Donald Trump, just how close is it?
Oh, incredibly close. I don't think you should put any money on it, unfortunately, although some betting companies are definitely doing. This is the closest election we've had since, to tell you the truth, I think it's even closer than 2000 when it came down to one state in the case of Florida. Here's the thing. The New Statesman model, which built by myself, and we did rather well in the UK, and I did rather well in the midterms of 2022. We currently have Kamala Harris with a 53% chance of winning, and that's down from 55% chance a few days ago, which is down from 56, 57% chance from a few weeks ago. It's got tighter, incredibly tighter. And it's based on a few things. Black voter enthusiasm isn't as great as it was in previous elections. There's a lot of apathy there, but there's also a lot of people considering other options. More minority voters are considering Trump, but that's partially a consequence of the enthusiasm, the overall projected turnout of black voters to be lower. So if Democratic turnout is lower, the proportion of black voters who go for Trump is going to be greater just by default, isn't it? Because you've got fewer people on the pitch. You've also got to realize that Democrats have always had a problem with white voters. Not since LBJ have Democrats won a majority or plurality of white Americans. Never, ever forget that, because it is such a disabling reality for them. Basket of deplorables, bitter communities by Obama. It just doesn't, you're not helping themselves. But it's nevertheless still coming down to the wire in Pennsylvania where it counts. Here's the thing. Harris is just marginally ahead in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. If she wins those three states, she's got the presidency. But if you assume the pollsters get it as wrong as in 2016 and 2020, Donald Trump is not just going to win this, he's going to win it quite well.
I mean, 50-50, flip of a coin. What are the issues that can tip that flip of a coin in one direction or another? I mean, you talked about Kamala Harris her polling coming down. Is that based on a particular issue? Did it turn at a particular moment in the campaign?
No, it hasn't really turned on a particular moment. Harris's debate performance really did her a good number. She sort of reintroduced herself to the country, because when you're vice president, you are very much boxed in. You're not really given much of a time to shine. You are very much in Biden's shadow. That debate did a lot for her favorables. It really reintroduced her to voters in a certain way. And so for Trump to refuse further debates is electorally sound on his perspective, because I think this race wouldn't be as tight as it currently is. What issues are currently motivating the voters? Well, primarily, above all else, it's the cost of living. Just like what we have here in Britain, the cost of living is king. The economy matters most to voters, okay? And I think in almost all economies in the West, where inflation has got out of control, where people are feeling few benefits of wages, you are going to lash out at the incumbents. We saw that here in Britain, which partly gave such a stonking majority for Labour. On paper, we should be seeing that for the incumbents in the White House. But the opposition to the incumbents is Donald Trump. Here's the thing. Trump is about 3 points behind Harris in terms of popularity, in terms of the popular vote. But he's about 5 points ahead of Harris in terms of who do you trust to manage the economy. That's the incumbent disadvantage, okay? And it's the issue that matters most to voters. It's the issue that is turning out white voters the most. And so for Harris to actually be tying in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, is, ooh, well, okay, that you're keeping it close. Well done, keep at it, because you shouldn't be, because most of the voters there care disproportionately about the economy. The other issue that matters most, well, really, it takes a very distant second, is abortion or healthcare. They often tie for joint second. But these issues, the people who rank them as most important to them, are very much the Democratic base. And Harris should really already have them under her belt already. And the fact that she doesn't, the fact that the Democratic base is quite apathetic, quite indifferent to the idea of a Trump win, which, sounds a little bit mad to we who commentate overseas, is not a good sign. But she's going hard on abortion. If she keeps doing that, she'll get the base out, but the base isn't enough. Harris needs to have some advantage or be polling Trump close on the economy to be really getting this election through.
Thank you so much, Ben. If you're saying no one should put money on it, I presume I'm not going to push you towards naming a prediction right now.
I really don't know. I've asked 1,000 different people have asked me this, and I've changed my mind 1,000 times. I think, to be honest with you, because the cost of living is so king, the incumbent should lose by default. The fundamental favors Trump, but it's Trump. Are Americans really going to do that? I don't know. This is why it really is 50-50.